People used to say we were inseparable. They said it like it was a compliment. Like it meant balance. Like it meant we were equals. But even back then, I noticed something no one else seemed to see. Whenever there was a pause in conversation, she filled it. Whenever a decision needed to be made, she stepped forward. Whenever someone asked me a question, she answered it first. And everyone accepted it. Including me. We met young. That matters. When friendships form early, you don't question the shape they take. You grow into them. Adjust around them. Learn which parts of yourself to soften so things stay easy. She was confident. Outspoken. Quick to respond. I was thoughtful. Quiet. Comfortable with silence. It felt natural at first. She'd say things like, "I know what you're trying to say," and laugh, and people would laugh with her. She'd summarize my thoughts before I finished expressing them, usually better than I could in the moment. She just gets you, people said. What they didn't see was how often I let my sentences trail off. How often I nodded instead of corrected. How often my opinions became ours, and then quietly became hers. It wasn't malicious. That's the hardest part to explain. She didn't steal my voice. She just used it so often that I forgot how it sounded on its own. In group settings, I became the agreeable one. The listener. The one people described as easygoing. She's the calm one, they'd say. She doesn't mind. And I didn't, until I started to. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It began with small moments. Subtle ones. Like when someone praised an idea I'd shared privately with her, only she was the one receiving the credit publicly. Or when plans were made for me, not with me. "She's fine with it," my best friend would say confidently. And because she said it with certainty, no one asked me. I didn't correct her. Not because I agreed, but because correcting her felt like making things awkward. And I had spent years learning how to avoid that. Looking back, I realize how skilled she was at shaping perception, not through lies, but through momentum. She spoke quickly, decisively, as if hesitation itself was weakness. Meanwhile, I learned to observe. I noticed how people deferred to her version of events without questioning it. How she positioned herself as the translator between me and the world. She means this. What she's trying to say is, she doesn't really care about that. Sometimes she was right. Sometimes she wasn't. But over time, the distinction blurred. Even to me. The first time I felt something break inside me, it was over something small. A decision that affected my future. One I hadn't agreed to. But by the time I was informed, it was already done, framed as mutual. I remember smiling. Then excusing myself. Then sitting alone and realizing I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a public choice that wasn't filtered through her voice. That scared me. Not because I wanted control, but because I realized how easy it had been to give it up. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I did what I'd always done best. I paid attention. Because when someone speaks for you long enough, they start believing they know you better than you know yourself. And that belief can be tested. The friendship had been years in the making. From sleepovers and shared secrets in high school to late-night calls in college, she had always been the one to take the lead. I didn't mind, at first. I liked the way she carried herself, the way she could walk into a room and immediately shape the mood. People listened to her, respected her, admired her. And I was there. The quiet witness. The one who understood the details, remembered names, dates, stories, and connections. The one who could hold the pieces together without anyone noticing. It felt safe. Comfortable. Until it didn't. I started noticing how often she spoke for me, not just summarizing, but overriding. Decisions that should have been ours became hers alone. Even simple choices, like which class to take or where to live, were explained through her narrative. I know what she wants, she would say, and everyone nodded. Friends, family, teachers, even colleagues. At first, I laughed it off. She just thinks she's helping, I told myself. But the pattern didn't stop. And then came the first serious moment when her help directly interfered with me. I had been offered a scholarship opportunity, one I'd been dreaming about for months. I confided in her, hoping for encouragement, guidance, maybe even a cheerleader. Instead, she presented it to our circle of friends as if it were a group decision. She spoke on my behalf, recommending options, explaining why I should choose a path I hadn't even considered. By the time I tried to speak, she had already convinced everyone, including me, that her idea was correct. I smiled politely, but inside, something shifted. That moment planted a seed I couldn't ignore. I realized I'd been letting someone else define my reality for years, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of it. From then on, I started observing more critically. I watched how she positioned herself in every situation, how she anticipated questions before they were asked, how she never hesitated to speak for me in front of strangers or in familiar groups, how her confidence made people believe she was always right, even when she wasn't. And I noticed how I had helped her do it. How I had been too polite, too patient, too willing to defer. How I had never corrected her in public, never demanded my own voice be heard. My silence had allowed her momentum to grow. I realized then that if I wanted anything to change, it couldn't start with confrontation. Confrontation would only make her defensive. She had always thrived in argument because she spoke faster, louder, and with more certainty. No, this needed a different approach, a quiet strategy, patience, and observation. I began taking notes, not openly, not to prove her wrong, just to understand. I documented conversations, the ways she positioned herself, moments she overshadowed me, and times I had allowed it. Patterns emerged. Predictable patterns. I started seeing opportunities where subtle intervention could shift the dynamic without drama. I also began cultivating my own spaces where her voice didn't dominate. Small, safe spaces where my ideas could grow without immediate interference. Sometimes it was a solo project at work. Sometimes a private conversation with a trusted friend. Sometimes simply thinking through a decision alone before allowing her input. The first time I quietly challenged her without her realizing it, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. It was subtle, just a small correction in a group setting, phrased carefully, almost as a question. Yet the effect was immediate. People listened differently. She paused, just a beat, and I realized she hadn't anticipated that response from me. That moment, small as it was, gave me clarity. The narrative could be shifted. Not by fighting her, not by shouting, not by confrontation, but by stepping into my own voice with precision and patience. And so I began preparing. Quietly, thoughtfully. Because if I wanted to reclaim myself, I couldn't rush it. I had to let it grow naturally, like a seed beneath the surface, unseen until the right moment. I had learned the rules. I had watched her play them for years. And now, it was time I began. Playing too. The first real test didn't announce itself. It started as an ordinary group project, something small on the surface, yet important enough that everyone involved would notice if it failed. She immediately took the lead, as usual. Outlined the plan, assigned roles, spoke in confident, rapid sentences that made it impossible to interrupt. Everyone nodded. Everyone deferred. I watched. But this time, I didn't stay completely silent. I paid attention in a different way. I noted the gaps, deadlines that weren't realistic, assumptions that hadn't been confirmed, details that had been overlooked. I observed how people responded to her instructions. Who hesitated but didn't speak up? Who followed blindly? Who depended entirely on her to interpret the expectations? I began to intervene slowly. Small suggestions, phrased as clarifying questions. Would it make sense if we double-checked this part? Could we confirm with them before finalizing? Questions, not commands. Almost invisible nudges. At first, she brushed them off. Not with hostility, but with that confident wave of authority that had always silenced me before. "It's fine," she said, with a smile. "I've got it handled." But I noticed something subtle. The group didn't respond the same way. They started pausing, thinking through my suggestions, weighing them. They asked follow-ups, consulted me quietly, and began seeing that my attention to detail mattered. Even if she didn't acknowledge it, people were noticing. I also noticed her reactions. She started glancing at me more frequently. Not confrontationally, but with curiosity, with calculation. She realized I wasn't as invisible as I had been. She began measuring her words around me, adjusting her narrative slightly, as if anticipating I might speak up again. Then came the first undeniable moment. A critical detail had been overlooked in the project, a step that could derail the entire plan if it wasn't addressed immediately. Everyone looked at her. She hesitated, the first real pause I had seen in years, and instinctively, everyone turned toward me. Without thinking about ego or credit, I explained the issue. Calmly, clearly, step by step. I outlined a solution, anticipating the questions they hadn't yet asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't seek acknowledgement. I just spoke. The effect was immediate. People started adjusting the plan according to my guidance. My suggestions worked. The project moved forward smoothly, and something subtle shifted in the room. Trust. She didn't lose authority entirely. Not yet. But for the first time, people were consulting me, listening to me, acknowledging my input without my having to push for it. The gap between her voice and mine narrowed, almost imperceptibly, yet significantly. Afterward, she tried to reclaim her momentum. In conversation, she would preempt my points, summarize my input as her own, and steer discussions. But now, I was ready. I intervened with precision, not confrontation, just enough to ensure clarity. Each time, the room noticed, and she couldn't dismiss it without seeming defensive. It was intoxicating, in a quiet, almost imperceptible way. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something stronger. Agency. The realization that I could participate fully in a space I had once ceded entirely. That my voice, patient, deliberate, understated, could shape outcomes just as much as hers. And as I went to bed that night, exhausted yet alert, I realized the dynamic had changed permanently. The first true recognition of my competence had arrived, not with applause, not with fanfare, but with subtle acknowledgement that I had always been capable, always observant, always prepared. For the first time, I wasn't just her echo. I was myself. And the journey had only just begun. The shift didn't go unnoticed. It was quiet at first. Almost imperceptible. She still spoke first in every conversation, still smiled confidently when introducing ideas, still positioned herself as the voice everyone deferred to. But now, the room paused when I spoke. People listened differently. Their eyes flicked to me before responding, waiting for my input. At first, I thought it was luck. But it wasn't. It was subtle strategy, patience, observation. I began noticing small cracks in her armor. Moments she hesitated, recalculated, or backtracked slightly when she realized I had anticipated her next words. She didn't argue outright. She didn't lose her composure. But the shift in her tone, her phrasing, even the way she gestured during conversations, all of it changed ever so slightly. She was aware, and she was recalibrating. Other people started noticing too. Colleagues, mutual friends, even family members subtly deferred to me in certain situations. A question asked in passing, a project decision, a casual debate. No one was announcing it aloud. No one said, "She finally spoke up." But the room recognized it. You can always tell when influence quietly changes hands. And then came the first real moment of tension between us. We were at a dinner with mutual friends. The conversation turned to planning a group trip, a seemingly trivial matter, but perfect for observing dynamics. She began speaking on my behalf as usual, outlining what I would want, what I should prefer, her voice flowing faster than mine could keep up with. This time, I didn't stay silent. I interrupted gently, not aggressively, just enough to assert clarity. "I actually think I'd prefer," I said. Her smile faltered, just a fraction. The room went quiet. No one corrected me. No one contested me. It was a small victory, almost laughably minor in the grand scheme, but it felt monumental. She recovered quickly, shifted the discussion, tried to regain control. But now, she had to account for me. She had to measure her assumptions. And every time she did, Her confidence was slightly tempered. From that point on, our interactions became a delicate dance. I never tried to overshadow her. I never raised my voice. I simply claimed my space carefully, deliberately, and consistently. Meanwhile, my own confidence grew in quiet ways. I started taking more initiative in group projects, social plans, even minor family decisions. I asked questions that forced clarity. I pointed out overlooked details. I documented responsibilities and deadlines in ways she hadn't anticipated. And the most important part, people responded. Not with dramatic acknowledgement, not with applause, but with trust, confidence, quiet reliance. The more I operated in this space, the more subtle power I accumulated. The more she adjusted, the more she paused to consider me. And the more I realized, for the first time in years, that I was no longer just her echo. I had become a voice people were listening to, deliberately, thoughtfully, and increasingly independently of her. By the end of that month, the change was unmistakable. Friends, colleagues, even strangers, everyone who had once only heard her speak for me now recognized that I could speak for myself. And when I did, my words carried weight. It was still quiet, still understated. But for the first time, the balance had shifted. The friend who had always dominated the conversation now had to account for me. And I had learned, finally, that subtlety could be more powerful than volume. The opportunity came quietly, not as a reward, not as a declaration, not with fanfare. It was a problem that no one else wanted to deal with, a group project at work, a delicate family event, a situation where coordination and insight mattered more than confidence. Everyone looked around, unsure who should step up. And somehow, by the time the question reached me, it was clear, this was my moment. I didn't claim it. I didn't announce it. I simply observed, assessed, and acted. The stakes were higher than usual. There were too many variables. Too many people relying on assumptions instead of facts. Too many potential missteps waiting to cascade. And my best friend, the one who had always spoken for me, still tried to dominate the narrative. She outlined the plan, assigned roles, and summarized points before anyone else could respond. It was almost familiar, almost predictable. But this time, I was ready. I began intervening subtly. Not confrontationally, not aggressively, just enough to redirect attention to the overlooked details. A question here, have we verified this timeline? A clarification there, what happens if this step fails? A suggestion, maybe we should get confirmation from this person before proceeding. Every intervention was small, almost invisible. But with each one, the group began to pause, to think, to consult me, to weigh my input before committing. She noticed immediately. I saw the calculation in her eyes. The subtle adjustment of tone, phrasing, even her gestures. She wasn't angry. Not openly. But she was aware. And I could see her reconsidering how to maintain control without seeming defensive. Then came the first critical moment. A crucial detail, buried in paperwork no one had fully reviewed, threatened to derail the entire project. Everyone froze. My friend's confidence wavered for a fraction of a second, the first real pause I had seen in years. And just like that, the room turned toward me. I didn't speak to assert dominance. I didn't demand credit. I calmly explained the problem, outlined the consequences, and presented a solution that accounted for all variables. Step by step, clearly and without drama. People listened. They followed the guidance. And it worked. The shift was subtle but undeniable. She could no longer overshadow me. The room no longer deferred automatically. People sought my perspective now, sometimes even before hers. Later, she tried to regain control. She summarized my points as if they were part of her own explanation, tried to steer discussions back in her favor, and smiled confidently. But I was ready. I had learned to intervene with precision, enough to clarify, enough to ensure understanding, without triggering confrontation. By the end of that week, the group dynamic had changed permanently. Friends, colleagues, even family members who had once only heard her speak for me now treated me as a voice of equal weight. It wasn't dramatic. No one gave me a speech. No one formally recognized me. But the trust was there, undeniable and quietly powerful. And in that quiet trust, I found something I had never had before: agency. Real agency. The ability to shape outcomes, to be heard, to matter, without demanding it, without arguing, without competing. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the friend who followed. I was the one who led, subtly, deliberately, and in a way that no one could dispute. And in that realization, I knew the journey had only just begun. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came in moments, quiet, almost imperceptible, until the pattern became undeniable. At first, it was small gestures. Colleagues or friends would check with me before committing to a decision. They would ask my opinion, sometimes even before asking hers. And when she tried to summarize my thoughts as her own, people began catching the subtle distinctions. They noticed when I clarified details she had missed. She noticed too. I saw it in her eyes: curiosity, calculation, and the faintest hint of unease. She began pausing mid-sentence, carefully measuring her words before speaking, adjusting her tone, framing her narrative differently around me. She was aware, and she was recalibrating. The first real test came unexpectedly. A situation arose that required quick thinking, strategy, and attention to detail, something she had always assumed she would handle. She moved to take control, speaking confidently, assigning roles, and assuming outcomes. But I had been observing. I had prepared. I had studied every nuance, anticipated every variable, and understood what she did not. When a critical flaw appeared in her plan, something that could have caused significant problems, the room froze. Everyone instinctively looked to me. I didn't hesitate. I explained the flaw calmly, clearly, and without ego. I presented a solution that accounted for every detail, step by step. There was no drama, no accusation, only clarity. The result was immediate. The plan was adjusted. The outcome was preserved. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. The people around me were no longer automatically deferring to her voice. They were listening to mine, weighing my perspective, acknowledging my competence. She tried to regain control, of course. She attempted to preempt my words, summarize my points, and steer the conversation. But this time, she could not do it without hesitation. She could not dominate without revealing the cracks I had quietly exposed over months. It was subtle, but it mattered. Every pause, every adjustment, every moment of recalculation strengthened my position. I didn't need to dominate the conversation. I only needed to be precise, deliberate, and patient. By the end of the week, the change was undeniable. Friends, colleagues, and even family members began consulting me first. They sought my perspective. They trusted my judgment. And the best part: no one had to confront her. No one had to shame her. The dynamic shifted organically, quietly, irreversibly. Even she began to recognize it. Not openly, not with acknowledgement, but in her subtle pauses, the way she adjusted her tone, the fraction of hesitation before she spoke. I saw it. She realized I had arrived. That the quiet, observant friend she had always spoken for had grown into someone who could not be overshadowed. That realization gave me something I had never experienced before: quiet power. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that works through precision, patience, and unshakable awareness. And I knew, in that moment, that nothing could reverse it. Here is the *** final part 7 ***, bringing the story to a calm, satisfying conclusion while keeping the immersive first-person, suspenseful, reflective style. The transformation didn't arrive with fanfare. There was no dramatic confrontation. No speech declaring victory. No sudden moment where she, my best friend, admitted that I had finally emerged. It was quiet, subtle, almost invisible, the way real change often is. I noticed it first in small interactions. People started pausing when I spoke, weighing my words thoughtfully. Friends consulted me for decisions before consulting her. Colleagues deferred to my insights on projects that once would have been dominated by her. Even family members, who had long assumed she was the guiding voice in every discussion, began asking for my perspective, considering it equally, sometimes even more carefully. She noticed too. I saw it in the way she measured her words around me. The subtle pauses, the slight recalibration of tone, the awareness that her influence was no longer absolute. She didn't resent it, at least not outwardly. She adapted. She adjusted. She accommodated. And in that adjustment, I realized something profound. I hadn't needed to overthrow her. I hadn't needed to argue, fight, or prove myself loudly. I had simply grown into my own voice, slowly, deliberately, and with patience. That growth became undeniable when an unexpected challenge arose. A situation that would have once allowed her to dominate, to speak for me, to direct outcomes without input. But this time, I spoke first. Not aggressively, not to compete, but with clarity and confidence. My words guided decisions. My reasoning shaped the outcome. People followed my lead, naturally, quietly, respectfully. It worked perfectly. And in that success, I understood the truth I had been learning all along. The power I sought was never about overpowering anyone else. It was about stepping into myself fully, refusing to shrink, refusing to let someone else define my reality. Later, in a quiet moment alone, I reflected on our friendship, the one that had shaped so much of my life. She had been confident, bold, and unrelenting. She had spoken for me for years. And yet, without intending to, she had taught me everything I needed to know. How to observe, how to understand dynamics, how to anticipate moves, and how to act decisively when the time was right. I didn't resent her anymore. I admired her. Because in the process of learning to find my voice, I had become someone I could finally trust completely. Someone who could stand independently, strategically, and thoughtfully. And that, I realized, was the quietest, most profound victory of all. I had been the best friend who always stayed in the shadows. Now, I was the one whose voice mattered, clearly, unmistakably, and forever.